We have covered that there are severe potential rewards or consequences for believers and non-believers. We have also reviewed the motivation for belief and the potential costs of non-belief. Finally, we covered a number of examples that seem to point to, at the very least, the possibility of God. In fact, based on the principles of science, we see that it would make more sense to err on the side of belief as we continue to ask questions, rather than to assume disbelief without proof. At this point, we must ask, why with so much uncertainty does there seem to be such a high level of motivation by those in power to push the narrative that there is no God? Also, why would they claim that this has already been proven as fact, when we know that even science says otherwise? We need to ask the question, who benefits if society can be convinced there is no God? Can the answer to this actually help us to have a clearer picture of the existence of God? The Church has separated from the state in most countries and has, over time, lost much of its influence. As a result, have people in power discovered that a different path must be taken to maintain control? Is atheism the new primary means of control by governments and other centers of power? So let's ask the question, why would any entity want to push the narrative that there is no God? To answer this, we are fortunate to have historical examples that we can look to rather than just hypothesize as to why. Karl Marx wrote in the Communist Manifesto that communism begins where atheism begins. That is to say that for communism, there would need to be no belief in God for it to not just thrive, but for it to begin in the first place. Joseph Stalin put the full force of the government behind this by closing all houses of worship for all religions and killing thousands of their leaders. The concept was so important that, in 1929, the new Soviet calendar eliminated Fridays, Saturdays and Sundays as they represented the days of worship for Muslims, Jews and Christians. The all-encompassing nature of Marxism and socialism were to encompass all aspects of life. In essence, it became its own religion, but where the government replaced God and where the state was more important than any individual. Eliminating competition from other traditional religions became paramount if ultimate power was to be obtained by the state. But why would they see belief in God as a hindrance? It is because of the importance religions place on foundational things such as eternal truths, countries, the past, individualism, and family. These things all draw attention and support away from the government and thus empower the individual as well as weaken the state. For the state or group to obtain ultimate power, eternal truths such as individual importance, freedom, justice, self-determination and morality would have to be abolished, as they lead to different classes of people and treat each individual as precious. Because religion and God place a high value on the freedom and importance of the individual, they would actually weaken the government. So let's take a closer look at these differences. Countries. Marx felt that to unite all peoples, that countries should be eliminated. It would be necessary to acquire political supremacy by taking over all countries so that in the end there would be one country ruled by one all-powerful state. Alternatively, the main religions also see humanity as one people but as a family under God, where each person is important rather than under an all-powerful government where the individual becomes unimportant. With God, there can be one family with many countries or one family with one country, but each individual is precious. The past. Marx saw tradition as a tool that was only a distraction, whereas religious texts use the past as a guide to avoid repeating previous mistakes and to pass traditions on to future generations. This is why Marxists and socialists often attempt to remove or modify statues, monuments, and textbooks. Individualism. Marx believed individuality was directly opposed to the state. The individual must be swept out of the way and made impossible. Abolition of individuality, freedom, and independence is paramount. Religion, on the other hand, although having a supreme being, still views freedom of the individual as paramount. A perfect example of this can be seen in Christianity, where God has granted grace to an individual through belief in Jesus. However, the individual is granted the freedom to accept or reject this gift. Family. Marx believed that if one could eliminate the family, that there would be no class systems. All would be of the state and to care for the state. To break down the family and even traditional gender roles would promote loyalty to the state alone. Most religions lift up the family and use them as examples of the close relationship you can have with the Creator. They are the means for transmitting wisdom, morality, and virtue. Though the admitted goal of Marxism and socialism is to create a single power structure where the individual ceases to exist and instead just becomes part of the whole, the truth is that all governments move toward this goal, but at different rates of speed. It is difficult to achieve this when they are not in the majority. A majority must first be obtained, and then they can easily pass the necessary laws to achieve their goals. An example of this can be seen in Hitler's National Socialist Party and their use of divide and conquer tactics. To overcome one large problem, they would separate and weaken the opposition by fragmenting them and turning them against each other. They could then eliminate them one by one while they are focusing on each other instead of on the government fomenting the division. Most religious texts, to the contrary, push for unity within the populace to overcome obstacles. It is important to use these differences and a view of history to apply objective lenses to what we currently see in society. Do we see governments growing in scope and power while individuals seem to lose importance? Are there frequent examples of the family unit being under attack? Are there calls to modify history or what would be classified as right or wrong, and fact or opinion? Does it seem as though there is a push to divide society and place the different segments at odds? We can ask these and numerous similar questions, but we already know the answers. These things are all happening while those in power seem to only gain in strength and influence. So to answer our initial question, why would any entity want to push the narrative that there is no God? The answer is because it will eventually lead to greater power. With power comes wealth, privilege, influence, and control. Belief in God is a direct barrier to this. Is that proof that God exists? No, of course not. But it is proof that there is a motivation for those in power to push the narrative of unbelief. Our prior discussions have shown us that at the very least it would make more sense to err on the side of belief in God, while still searching for our own truth. This makes the current atheistic view rather suspect and does give credence to the views of believers. And this series and the ones to follow are not designed to persuade or dissuade any individual to a specific belief. They are, however, meant to free individuals from bias and allow them to ask their own questions and find their own truths. We will continue by delving into the religions themselves and give potential believers and non-believers alike a view to the most important questions one can ask about God and how the paths of worship are defined. For further and more in-depth discussions on this series and related topics, please visit Aware Care Share.